story begins with a man named Henri, who is out shopping, while a girl named Constance is about to take her driving test. During the test, the examiner asks her to turn left, but she takes the wrong turn. The examiner asks if it's her first time taking the test, to which she replies it's her fifth attempt. Later, Constance helps at her father's vegetable stall, though she's not great at taking orders. Her father scolds her for failing the driving test once again and tells her she'll need to learn to drive to help with the business. However, Constance explains that she won't, as she's planning to move to Paris. Shortly after, the young woman heads to Paris and tries to find the address of Mr. Boiseau. She arrives at his apartment and introduces herself, but he claims not to know anyone named Constance. She insists, explaining that his son had posted a room rental ad at that apartment, and she asks to see the place, as she has traveled from afar. Boiseau finally agrees and lets her in. As she tries to converse with him, he responds curtly. They enter the room and Constance remarks that the room is cool, though Boiseau doesn't know what she means. Constance checks out the room and notices several things that need fixing, but Boiseau tries to downplay them as unfixable to discourage her from staying. Constance tells Boiseau that she had agreed with his son that the rent would be $250, prompting him to show her the bathroom, mentioning that his wife chose the sinks. She then asks if his wife passed away, to which he responds that it's none of her business. Boiseau also claims the water heater doesn't work, leading Constance to joke that she doesn't bathe. Seconds later, she turns on the faucet and realizes the old man had lied. Henri explains it was just a test, as he doesn't want to rent to people who don't bathe, prompting Constance to assure him she's now more eager to rent the room. Boiseau then has her fill out a questionnaire. Upon leaving the apartment, Constance notices another girl also interested in renting the room, so she wishes her luck. Later, she decides to look for other rental options. The next day, Constance meets a boy who tells her he has to go pick up his daughter. Moments later, she receives a call from Boiseau, informing her that the room is hers, as the other applications were disappointing, so Constance thanks him. She tells the boy that she found a room in Paris and asks if he minds her leaving, to which he responds that they both always knew this day would come, making Constance feel sad. In the afternoon, Constance's mother and brother take her to the train to say goodbye, give her some money and a box of chocolates for Mr. Boiseau. She boards the train and begins her journey. Constance arrives at the apartment, where the old man tells her he'll need to raise the rent due to all the luggage she brought. She ignores this and gives him the chocolates, after which Boiseau hands her a set of rules she must follow. Later, Constance overhears Boiseau having a phone conversation with his son Paul, who invites him to lunch on Sunday, though Boiseau declines because he doesn't like Paul's wife. Boiseau then asks Constance if she overheard the conversation, to which she replies that she did. He explains that Paul is a fool who married a useless woman named Valerie, and he also mentions that they want to have children, making him fear that his grandchildren will have the intellect of a fish. Later, Constance is watching TV when she decides to play the piano, which Boiseau had forbidden her to touch. Suddenly, she hears the old man return home. Boiseau reminds her that he had already said no one was allowed to play that piano, then asks her to leave. She insists she will never do it again. Boiseau explains that her parents hadn't covered her expenses, so she now owes him 2 months' deposit, plus the rent for the current month. Constance admits she doesn't have enough money to pay him, so Boiseau tells her she'll have to leave. She offers to help around the house while she saves up, so Boiseau tells her he needs help dealing with his son and daughter-in-law and asks her to break up his son's marriage. Although Constance says she isn't capable of doing such a thing, Boiseau explains that his son has never been with anyone other than Valerie, thinking he can't find anyone better. He urges her to show him that he could explore new horizons, promising in return to forget about the deposit and give her 6 months of free rent. Constance agrees. Later, Constance goes to a restaurant to ask for a job. The bartender tells her to come back the next day, offering her a drink in the meantime. The next day, Paul arrives at the apartment, so Constance lets him in, and they talk about Boiseau. Paul asks her to look after his father, as he has breathing problems, promising to lower her rent in exchange. She agrees, and Paul mentions he must leave for his job as an accountant, a job he dislikes but continues because he inherited the company from his father. Before leaving, Boiseau invites Paul to lunch on Sunday because Constance will be cooking, as he dislikes Valerie's cooking. Paul gets annoyed by his father's insults toward his wife and leaves. Boisseau then asks Constance to wear the same pajamas on Sunday to appear attractive to Paul. Later, Constance finds herself juggling work and studies. Days pass, and Boisseau wakes Constance up to prepare the lunch he had mentioned before. She gets annoyed and tells him she's been thinking about his son, observing that he seems repressed, which irritates the old man. Later, Constance prepares the meal, and Paul arrives with Valerie. As Constance welcomes them, she notices that Valerie is somewhat absent-minded. Then Constance and Paul set the table and chat about their lives. Suddenly, Constance tells Paul that his presence is very calming, making him feel nervous. Constance asks Paul what he thinks of her, to which he responds that he thinks she's just a nice person. During the meal, Constance shares that at first, she and Boisseau clashed over the piano. Paul suggests to his father that he should sell the piano if he doesn't plan to use it, which only angers Boisseau, leading them into an argument. Valerie tries to lighten the mood by suggesting that Constance play a melody. Constance begins to play, making Boisseau sentimental as he remembers when his wife used to play that instrument, so he decides to leave. Paul mentions they should go as well, and Valerie tells Constance she can keep the dessert she brought, nicknaming her Little Constance. The next day, Constance goes to school and realizes she has failed again, making her cry. Later, she goes to a club to distract herself. She returns home, and the following day, Valerie knocks on the door to pick up the dessert container she had left. Constance hands it to her, but suddenly starts to feel ill and vomits into Valerie's container. Then Valerie gives Constance a glass of water, while Boisseau advises her not to drink again. But Constance starts crying, mentioning how her life feels awful due to failing her exams. Valerie tries to console her, and Boisseau suggests that if she's not good at one thing, she could try the piano. Constance then begins to play a piece she composed, earning praise from both Boisseau and Valerie. Constance mentions it's the first compliment she's received in a long time. She then asks Valerie if she knows the story of Boisseau's wife. Valerie shares that his wife died 30 years ago after falling from a window while cleaning it. Constance laughs, prompting Valerie to tell her it isn't funny. Valerie then asks Constance if she's into older men, hinting at her feelings for Paul, but Constance denies it. Later, Constance tells Boisseau she realizes that Valerie loves Paul deeply, so she can't come between them. The old man tells her she has until Monday to pack her things and leave. That night, Constance tries searching for other rental options, but with no luck. She decides to visit her parents' house, only to find they're remodeling her room to make it a nursery, which upsets her. Constance greets her brother and father, and her father mentions that her exam results should have been released the previous week, suspecting she failed again. She lies, saying she didn't tell them she passed because she wanted a family celebration, which makes her parents express pride in her achievement. Moments later, Constance returns to the apartment and tells the old man that she plans to go through with his request. Boisseau is pleased to hear this, and Constance asks him to tell her more about Paul. Later, Boisseau searches for advertisements from a music school in London, prints one, and places it in his own mailbox. The next day, Constance finds the music school flyer in the mail. Boisseau suggests it could be a good opportunity for her, but Constance explains they wouldn't accept her. Days later, Constance goes to the swimming pool where Paul swims and compliments his physique when they meet. After swimming, Paul offers to drive her back to the apartment. Along the way, Constance mentions her love for soccer, a subject Boisseau had told her his son enjoyed, sparking an engaging conversation that leaves Paul intrigued. They arrive at the apartment, and Constance shows Paul a jersey from his favorite team. Then Paul notices Constance has a book of his favorite novel, so she reads a short passage to him. Constance then brings up other topics to appear interesting, leading Paul to comment that she's very mature for her age. She seizes the moment to confess that she's attracted to him, saying she finds men over 40 more appealing than those her age. Paul becomes nervous and tells her he's too old for someone like her before deciding to leave. Constance tries to stop him to give him her number. Paul takes it, but clarifies that he won't be calling her. Constance returns to her room, where Boisseau asks how it went, but she simply replies that what she just did makes her feel disgusted. She adds that Paul will never leave his wife because he loves her. Boisseau explains that he needs them to separate because Valerie wants Paul to sell the company that he inherited, and he insists that Constance keep flirting with Paul until he succumbs. Later, Constance goes to a club with a coworker, but notices that the DJ named Simon is talking to her, so she decides to go over to him. The next morning, Constance wakes up at Simon's house, and as he leaves, he tells her he'll call her another day. Minutes later, Constance receives a message from Paul, saying that he also has feelings for her. Later, Constance mentions to her coworker that Simon hasn't called her since their last outing, and her coworker advises her to forget about him. Suddenly, Paul arrives and tells Constance that he asked his wife for a break. Constance clarifies that she's not a homewrecker, but Paul assures her he'll take full responsibility. Paul invites her out, but she declines, explaining that she's going to the club with her coworkers. Paul offers to drive her. At the club, Constance has fun with the others, but then she sees another woman kissing Simon, which makes her feel jealous. Afterward, Paul drives Constance back to the apartment, but she starts crying, expressing how awful her life is. Paul tries to comfort her and then kisses her, though she tells him things are moving too fast. The next morning, Paul returns home, and Valerie demands the car keys to pack her things and leave, revealing that she called him more than 15 times the previous night with no response. Paul tries to explain, but when she opens the trunk, Valerie finds a jacket and tells him she's disgusted before leaving. In the afternoon, Paul tries to contact Constance, but she doesn't respond. Meanwhile, Boisseau tells Constance he called the music school, explaining that she has a year to prepare for the entrance exam. He hands her a letter of recommendation, and she thanks him. The next day, Constance is at work when Paul arrives and tells her he bought 2 tickets for a holiday in Venice. She tells him it's better to forget what happened, explaining that she met someone her own age that she likes. Paul is saddened by this news. Later, Jerome informs him that Valerie has inquired about the divorce process. That night, Paul receives a call from Valerie, and he heads to her place. The next morning, he tells his father that Valerie is pregnant, which makes him very happy because they have been trying for more than 10 years. Boisseau doesn't seem pleased with the news, prompting Paul to comment that his father is a bitter man who should be thrilled about becoming a grandfather. Boisseau retreats to his room, and Paul tells him that they'll have a family lunch on Sunday and warns him that if he doesn't show joy when Valerie shares the news, he'll never visit again or let him see his grandchild. Boisseau responds that he's not afraid of this threat. Then Paul shares the news with Constance, who is genuinely happy for him. Paul mentions that they should avoid seeing each other for a couple of weeks. Moments later, Constance and her coworkers are celebrating because one of them is going on a trip. But soon Constance receives a call from her father, who tells her he found out she failed her exams again. Back at the apartment, Boisseau asks Constance if she applied to the music school, but she says no because she plans to work in her father's business. Boisseau notices that Constance has been drinking and shares that when his wife fell from the window, alcohol was found in her blood. Constance assures him not to worry since she doesn't drink much, though Boisseau mentions that his wife had said the same. Constance packs her bags and Boisseau takes a sad walk, knowing she'll be leaving on Sunday. That day, Paul and Valerie arrive, and Valerie reveals to Boisseau that they're expecting a baby, so he feigns happiness for them. Constance and the others toast to the couple's baby, but soon Boisseau excuses himself, saying he wants to rest. After he leaves, Valerie notes that Boisseau didn't seem genuinely happy, but Paul explains that's just his way of showing joy. Moments later, Constance enters Boisseau's room to tell him she has to go and thanks him for everything. She also mentions that he behaved very well when hearing the news about his grandchild. Before she leaves, Boisseau tells her not to wait until his age to pursue what she loves, but she simply says goodbye and leaves. Outside, Constance tells her father that she has no intention of working in his business, which angers him, leading him to say she's no longer welcome at home. Constance is upset by his comment and explains that she won't fall for his emotional manipulation anymore. She plans to stay and apply to music school. Months pass, and Constance practices the piano, preparing for her music school application. Finally, the day arrives for her to pack her bags and head to London. She says goodbye to Boisseau and sets off on her journey by train, eventually reaching the music school, where she joins others in playing the piano. Days later, Constance returns to Paris and meets Paul, who tells her she can stay in the apartment as long as she wants. He also mentions that Boisseau was incredibly happy when he found out she was accepted into the school. Paul then shares that Boisseau had been admitted to the hospital the same day his grandchild was born and eventually passed away in his sleep. At that moment, Constance confesses to Paul that she had lied to Boisseau. In reality, she didn't pass the entrance exam to the music school. She only wanted him to feel proud of her when she learned he wasn't doing well. Paul hands her a letter that Boisseau had written, offering her some advice and gifting her his piano. Constance leaves the apartment and decides to place a flower on Boisseau's grave.
If you want interesting movie recaps, like, share, and subscribe to follow us for more movie recaps.